Hey guys, we got some interesting polls that have come out this week, and we're starting to get some movement in these numbers. I thought it might take at least reaching the first debate before we'd start to get some serious shifting in the polling landscape, but that hasn't been the case. We've actually been getting some fascinating results over this past week, and I have 5 new polls that I want to talk about. 3 of them are national in orientation, and then 2 of them are state-specific, looking at Nevada and California. If you're interested in looking at all this data for yourself, I'll have the polls linked down in the video description. And the movement that we've been seeing has been Joe Biden reducing quite a bit, where just a month or so ago, he was consistently in the mid-30s, approaching 40% support, which is quite impressive considering how many candidates are in this race. But those numbers have been creeping down. He's now more in the mid-20s to approaching 30% range in a lot of these different results. He still has his occasional poll here and there where he's very strong with those numbers, but we've generally been seeing a backslide from Joe Biden. That's been notable. And then Bernie Sanders, he's been generally hanging around the same position, maybe just taking a slight step back, in contrast to some other candidates like Elizabeth Warren, who's been seeing quite a surge in her support, where she's consistently in 3rd place or even overtaking Bernie in some of these results and being in 2nd place, very competitive with Sanders. And then we also see Pete Buttigieg continuing to do pretty well for himself, and Kamala Harris and Beto O'Rourke, not great starts to their campaign, more hovering around or maybe even reducing a little bit from where they were early on in the process. So we see with this particular Change Research poll, this was taken amongst around 1,600 likely Democratic primary voters, and Biden has 2 candidates hot on his heels with Sanders and Warren at 21 and 19% support respectively, compared to Biden, who's at 26, Buttigieg at 14, Kamala Harris at 8, and Beto O'Rourke a disappointing 3% support for him. Now moving over to a Quinnipiac poll that also, of course, just came out recently. And first, going to take a look at those head-to-head matchup numbers. And Biden, this is one area where he consistently has been outperforming the rest of the field. He's got overwhelming name recognition, which helps his case, but he can also maybe bring over a little bit of that Republican vote. We're not talking about much, but maybe 5 to 10% instead of 0 to 5%, which some of these other candidates might be in more of that earlier mix. But Joe Biden, a 13 percentage point lead over Donald Trump, 53 to 40. Bernie Sanders also doing pretty well here. He has a 9 percentage point lead over Trump. Kamala Harris an 8% lead. Elizabeth Warren a 7% lead. And then Buttigieg and Booker both with 5 percentage point leads respectively. Now, we've seen Elizabeth Warren make gains on Bernie Sanders. And if it's a situation where it's a 3-horse race amongst Biden, Sanders, and Warren, that would basically be a best-case scenario for Biden, because you'd get a situation where Sanders and Warren would split a lot of that progressive vote of the Democratic electorate, and Biden could coalesce the more centrist, moderate Democratic voters behind his candidacy and might make it easier for him to win. Now, given the fact that Warren has been creeping up in the polls and doing more similarly now to Sanders, there's been some calls, I think it's pretty ridiculous, that Sanders should drop out even at this very early portion of the process, or he should drop out before the caucuses and primary start and coalesce that progressive support behind Elizabeth Warren. But the argument that you can make for Sanders is overwhelmingly the head-to-head polls between Sanders and Trump, he does quite a bit better in general to what Warren does against Donald Trump. That's not necessarily the case as much in this Quinnipiac poll, where Sanders has a 9-point lead and Warren has a 7 percentage point lead. But I've seen in a lot of specifically state polls, and you go through the Midwest, taking a look at states like Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and that's where Bernie Sanders tends to do pretty well against Trump, especially in contrast to somebody like an Elizabeth Warren. And then also just beyond that, the fact that Bernie Sanders has a tremendous grassroots network of support behind his candidacy. He looks like he could be stronger than Elizabeth Warren, even if the polls aren't having him significantly ahead Warren. Having those grassroots volunteers and strongly committed supporters behind your candidacy are real people that are going to come out and vote and support you, and that's where Sanders also is doing very well, also getting those small dollar donations. So it'll be interesting if Elizabeth Warren can continue to grab more support and continue to climb up in the polls. And at this point, she's gotten right around to where Bernie Sanders is. And then we've also, of course, seen Joe Biden slide back a bit. So it could be a situation here where Elizabeth Warren's actually taking some of that Joe Biden support away from him, more so than maybe what she's doing to Sanders, because Sanders has been in a relatively similar spot while Biden has come down a bit more so. So that's more of a Biden vote that has potentially gone to other candidates such as an Elizabeth Warren. But I'm being a bit long-winded with this particular part of the video, so I'm going to move on and take a look At those Democratic primary numbers in this Quinnipiac poll, Biden leads the way at 30% support. This is down 5 points from where he was towards the end of May and down 8 points from where he was towards the end of April. Sanders has gone up to 19% support compared to 16% in that prior Quinnipiac poll, and it was actually 11 points in the one prior to that even. So during this course of around a month plus, Sanders has gained 8 points in the Quinnipiac poll, while Biden has reduced 8 percentage points. So that's a good sign for Bernie in that respect. Warren, she's at 15% support, taking a little bit of a jump up there for herself. Buttigieg at 8%, Kamala Harris at 7%, Beto O'Rourke just at 3% support, and a disappointing number again there for Mr. O'Rourke. All right, this is the last national poll I want to touch on. It's from The Economist, and again, we see Joe Biden in that mid 20% range, around 26% support. And in second place behind him, we have Elizabeth Warren at 16% support and Bernie at 12% support. And then all of the other candidates are in single digits. Pete Buttigieg doing the best amongst the rest at 8% support. We also see Kamala Harris at 6% and another consistent 3% there for Beto O'Rourke. Now I'm going to move over and take a look at the state-specific results, first going to Nevada, and then after that taking a look at California, and that's where we're going to wrap things up. So taking a look here at the state of Nevada, this is a Monmouth poll, and Joe Biden doing pretty well for himself in this one with that 36% support. Elizabeth Warren again in second place, outpacing Bernie Sanders. She's at 19% support, Sanders at 13% support. All the other candidates in single digits. A disappointment for Kamala Harris at just 6% support, considering that Nevada is the neighboring state to California. So if there's anywhere that she would like to outperform what her national numbers are saying, it would be a state like Nevada, but that's not the case. And it's just been a pretty disappointing start to the Kamala Harris campaign in general, where she hasn't been able to build the type of momentum that we've seen from other candidates like a Pete Buttigieg or an Elizabeth Warren, for instance. And now I want to wrap up this video taking a look at the all-important state of California. They have a treasure trove of pledged delegates, which is why it's so important to get at least 15% support in the California primary. So starting off here, Joe Biden leading the way, 22% support, but pretty competitive amongst these top three again, where we have Elizabeth Warren in second place at 18% support and Bernie Sanders in third place at 17% support. And those are the three candidates in this scenario who would be put into a basket of candidates that would split up those all-important pledged delegates in the state of California. A disappointing result for Kamala Harris, where she's just at 13% support in the state where she is a senator from. If Kamala Harris doesn't get a good chunk of that pledged delegation in the state of California, then her campaign would pretty much be over at that point in time. But we still have a lot of runway and track for her to go to try to make up and continue to try to improve on her numbers, but just not a good look for her at this point in time, not doing as well as what have become the three frontrunners anyway amongst Biden, Warren, and Sanders. And we have Buttigieg there at 10% support, and Beto O'Rourke again at 3% support, and then all the other candidates are at 1 percentage point or less. And taking a look at where the candidates are doing their best, so we see here Biden in the state of California. Again, it's the older voter demographics. Warren, she's doing really well among self-identified progressive and liberal voters, as well as those that are in the age of 30 to 39. And Sanders does his best amongst those that are under the age of 30. And he's also doing the best, narrowly having a lead over Biden amongst Latino voters. So that's how I wanted to wrap up this video, guys. Touched on 5 polls that have come out in recent days, and we're getting some much more interesting numbers as we've been seeing some changes in how those percentage of support have been switching amongst the upper tier candidates, particularly with Biden reducing quite a bit and Elizabeth Warren gaining what seems to be a lot of that support. Maybe that's coming over from Biden and coalescing behind perhaps an Elizabeth Warren, which doesn't necessarily make a ton of sense because they're very different candidates. But when you have one candidate who's losing quite a bit of support and another candidate who's gaining quite a bit of support, that's the equation that you have to do in your head there, where it seems like that's the shift that might be going on, but there's still a lot of polls left to be had in the coming weeks and the coming months. I encourage you to click that subscribe button, and I hope to see you guys back here for my next video.